So once again, I want to thank Nelson Mullins for hosting us. Fantastic offices here in Atlanta, great views, etc. I just want to bring up one point addressing what Michael Hollins was talking about in healthcare, which is that I've come across several healthcare monitoring companies. Like the big deal right now is for diabetics to monitor blood sugar on a 24/7 basis, and there are devices being developed right now that are connected to your Bluetooth. So you put them in your body, and it if you're diabetic, and it monitors your blood sugar spikes. So that way you're getting injections at the right time. And I think that's happening as well with blood pressure. In the near future, you're going to see a lot of devices that will monitor blood pressure, blood sugar, etc. for events. Because anybody who takes blood pressure medicine knows that it's different at different times of day. So again, I want to thank everybody for being here. We're going to be in Miami December 9th, and that's going to be great. Miami's always great, and we've had lots of fun there, and we've been going there for 12 or 13 years. And I've got some great speakers lined up for Miami, and obviously there's a huge network of family offices out of Palm Beach, and we'll have some representatives there down in Miami. And then it will be in San Francisco, January 12th, 13th, and there's going to be like a daisy chain of decisions to make, which is that if we can't do San Francisco because of this 10-person, 2-hour limit on meetings, we'll do Palo Alto. If Palo Alto doesn't work, we'll go to Vegas. So it'll happen. And then we're either going to do New York in February or Boston, Puerto Rico. And then we'll do South by Southwest, because we always do South by Southwest. It's a great time. Let's talk about manager selection. I'm really happy that we got the people here. So it's really funny. There's actually a pretty big contingent of Philadelphia people that have moved to Atlanta. Both Robert and Kevin went to grad school in Philadelphia. And I think that Karen from the first panel also was an ex-Philadelphian, but there's also a lot of New Yorkers. It's funny, every day I speak to somebody on the phone and they've moved here from New York or somewhere else, or they moved to Florida. So welcome, Shawn Donahue is going to be speaking, talking about manager selection in the family office space. He's another New York exile. Yep. And we've got Lawrence Richards, who's in, Lawrence, are you there right now? He's in.
I am.
Fantastic. Good to see you, Lawrence.
Good to see you.
Los Angeles, which is a fantastic place to be doing business, and hopefully it's opened up a little bit more there recently. And then Robert Butler. Do I have Robert?
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, fantastic, Robert Butler. So Robert is one of our main season work group out of Austin historically. Today he is in Arizona.
Yep.
And great guy. And as I've told everybody, Robert's a CFA. He's probably worked in hedge fund marketing and every other type of marketing in the past. So if you're looking for contacts in Texas or Arizona, Robert is the guy to go to. He's just fantastic. Robert has led many panels for us. So Robert, why don't you take it away? Talk about manager selection, what people are looking for in funds, strategies, etc. Robert, introduce yourself.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Marty, for the intro. Robert Butler, I'm independent consultant. I've been doing these events with Marty since I think 2011. This will be my second virtual moderating, so obviously a little different, but nice to be able to join an Atlanta event from Tucson. Normally based in Austin, but it's COVID, so you can be anywhere. A little bit more on my background related to the manager selection panel. I did work at a small hedge fund where I was the first employee. So I was director of marketing, operations, and chief compliance officer. So got to see kind of all sides of the business from that. And then worked at a large broker dealer as the director of due diligence for alternative investments. But that's a little bit on me. I'll let my panelists give a little intro on themselves, their firms, and maybe also share any sort of overall manager selection philosophy, and then jump into some of the prepared topics we have to cover.
Oh, did he freeze?
Lawrence, are you there?
I am here. I think he just froze.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Yes. Why don't you go first?
Okay, great. First of all, Marty, a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I'm not at these beautiful offices in Atlanta. I wish I were there with you guys. Um, Also, Atlanta is the home of my childhood and current hero, Hank Aaron. I wish I was there, and my dream is to meet Hank Aaron, um, and my child's dream as well. So, if anyone knows Hank Aaron, this is my chance to say it, or has a connection to him, please let me know. Would be of personal great significance to me. Okay, a pleasure to be here. I based in Los Angeles, and I run a family office called Legacy Road Family Offices, and I oversee the investments and business interests of a group of exceptionally affluent families here in the Beverly Hills and proximate areas. I ran a single family office. I oversaw their investments, a single family office, for around 6-7 years. Just a little background: born in New York, raised here in Los Angeles, undergrad at Penn. So shout out to the people in Philadelphia. Business school at USC, worked at the New York Mercantile Exchange after business school in an internal strategic and operational role, not as a trader, but with the executive team at the exchange. And after that, started working with some families in New York and for a few years, and then was subsequently hired to help found and oversee the investments of a single family office, working there for around 7 years. And now for the last 7 years or so, I've been back here in LA, and I oversee the investments of a group of families here. And using the same model of a single family office, working with the families in different degrees of depth and specifics given the family situation, but basically overseeing their wide-ranging investments in the public and private markets, helping them with business issues and business management as needed as well, and understanding their overall liquidity, cash flow, estate planning, personal, professional, business needs. And a lot of what we do is investing in funds and manager selection. That's a very interesting and important topic for me. We going back to my days running a family office, a lot of what I do is interviewing different managers, getting to understand who they are personally and professionally, and making a decision to invest. And I'll just open with the idea that making a decision to invest is maybe become harder for me on some level. Maybe the more you know, the less you know, right? So, and the issues are varied. It's not only one of the and I'll highlight at the end. It's not only performance. It's not only investment team. It's not only strategy, market outlook, etc. But it's also the people. And again, I don't mean to be trite or cliched, but the more I do this, the more I realize that it's about the people. It's about their way of doing business. It's about, maybe ethics is too broad a word, but just how they interact and deal with situations on a regular basis. And that is very hard to game and understand, even in a due diligence process. So when we can talk about that later. So that's just sort of an overview of myself. Let me turn it back over to you, Marty, or Robert, if you're still there.
I'm still here. So hopefully I didn't freeze again or whatever happened. But Shawn, do you want to go ahead and give kind of your intro and background?
Sure. So Shawn Donahue, I'm very glad to be here. I think as others have echoed. I think, Marty, we first met 10 years ago when my partner, Sama Drangi, presented in New York at one of your panels. It's a long time coming. I've recently relocated to Atlanta, and I think one of the nice things about being here is that the South has lived up to its reputation. People have really opened many doors and rolled out the red carpet for me as someone new to the area. So that's something certainly both myself and my broader family are really appreciative of. So thank you all for that. I spent about 20 years in the investment industry. Started out on the buy side, working with large asset managers, predominantly in strategic consulting roles. So I would work either directly with the investment team on refining their investment process or developing products, or working with the distribution side of the business on how to enter new markets. I've spent about the last 10 plus years working for hedge funds. I've had a variety of roles, much like others on the panel, where I've raised capital for hedge funds. I've been the COO of a mid-sized hedge fund, and I've evaluated hedge funds as part of my role in our broader family office. So in addition to assisting hedge funds and investing hedge funds, I do also evaluate hedge funds as part of my day-to-day work. I'm currently running two entities called Saranac Lake Capital and Saranac Lake Advisors. Saranac Lake Capital is a traditional third-party marketing firm. Most of the allocators I work with are either family offices or other fund-to-funds who are particularly interested in niche-oriented hedge fund strategies. I think large hedge funds in many instances, particularly on the equity side, have failed allocators over time. And yet there remains some interest for people who are really willing to roll up their sleeves or find the right partnerships to identify structural inefficiencies in smaller strategies. The other area where I tend to focus is on short selling strategies, and that's just an area where I have a lot of direct experience over the last 10 years. My second business, the advisory business, actually works with startup managers and provides them with board assistance as it pertains to governance, marketing and business planning efforts, and really it serves to just keep me plugged into the ecosystem of folks who touch small managers. As far as manager due diligence, it's an interesting topic. I think you have to start at the opportunity set first and foremost. And if I were giving sort of high level advice, I think like any asset class, you have to be capable of evaluating the strategy. And I think that's challenging. I think a lot of the reason that people gravitated towards long short equity was because it was a natural extension of long only equity. So I think if you're looking at strategies, make sure that you or someone you're partnering with is very credible in evaluating them. Secondly, you don't generally get paid to be first. I think you get paid to be early. So oftentimes, looking at managers that have gone through that first leg of their maturation is a good time to begin to evaluate them. And again, do that with other folks who can assist you. I think also at a high level, and I think something that's particularly relevant today, is to evaluate the level of transparency and communication you're going to have with the fund manager. I think transparency has always been important. It's one of those things that's rarely evaluated up front because everyone's looking at managers who are performing well. And when things are going well, it's easier for the manager to be a bit cagier about sharing. You may feel like you're perhaps in a privileged position to have access to the manager at that time. But I think one of the things that families need to continue to understand, and something that we've learned, is that this has to be a fit. And you want to evaluate that fit up front and say, here are our expectations about communication, about transparency. And one of the things that's challenging, and we can get into this, is how do you evaluate these sort of things in a COVID environment where you can't actually sit face to face and get a read of someone's body language, where you can't look at how cleanly their office is, which is something I'll talk about and perhaps why that's important later. But I do think you want to understand how they communicated in the past, particularly during difficult times, and what are you going to expect of them, and do they think that's going to be reasonable? Because this is really more of a matchmaking exercise than it is, hoping to place money somewhere and hoping to see a return.
All right. Well, obviously I think there's a lot we can drill down into on the due diligence side. But I thought I'd start with, sort of the beginning of the process. And I'd love to hear how both of you guys source, manager and investment opportunities other than obviously Marty's event. And, I don't know, Shawn, if you just want to continue on that, just talk a little bit how you, tend to source most of your investments.
Sure. And I think sourcing and diligence go hand in hand. I think having that ecosystem of people who can bring you ideas is obviously important. But when it comes to vetting the quality of the opportunity set itself and vetting the quality of the manager, oftentimes you have to rely on other experts that are in that ecosystem. Given my focus on smaller managers, I have a lot of relationships with law firms. So people who are crafting the offering docs are a good place to start. And I tend to focus on law firms that cater to smaller managers, just given that's my area of focus. Administrators, and again, I focus on administrators that work with smaller managers. Those administrators are in a unique position to actually have a day-to-day relationship with that manager and to see the actual holdings. So they have a pretty good view on what it is that the manager is doing. Is it in line with what they say they're supposed to be doing? And to some extent, if valuation comes into play where there's discretion on behalf of the manager, they have a read as to what level of discretion that manager tries to take or how aggressive they are. So I think administrators can be a good source of leads. Other hedge fund managers, as part of my diligence process, when I find a strategy that's potentially interesting, I'll ask the manager, who does she respect in that space? So who are the other 3 or 4 people that you think are high quality short sellers? And have those discussions. I find those to be more useful than the references that are typically given from the manager, him or herself. Obviously, they're picking people who are all going to say very nice things about them. The cap intro teams of the prime brokers do a nice job. That continues to be a valuable source as they have lots of people scouring the universe of managers. And again, depending on the type of hedge fund you're looking for, if you're looking for blue chip funds, then go to the blue chip PBs, go to the Goldmans, the Morgan Stanleys, the JP Morgans. If you're looking for emerging managers, go to Jefferies, go to TD, go to the introducing brokers.
And then Lawrence, anything you want to add on the sourcing side?
Yeah, Shawn, those are great comments. Really great comments. I really liked what you had to say. In addition, I'll emphasize 2 different points. One is just your personal network and knowing people who have worked with others and hearing firsthand from people that you trust and respect and getting their perspectives. Another area, and this is quite interesting, is just, I will call it cold emails, LinkedIn, and just these emails I get. Now, I will tell you, I personally get tons of emails, people asking different managers, are you interested, etc. And I sift through them. And every now and then I have to tell you, and a lot of them are great emails, by the way. Most of them are seemingly credible. I don't respond to most of them, but overall they look strong. And every now and then I do respond, and we get into good conversations. And I recently invested in a venture capital fund because of a cold email that I received, and the investment has absolutely been superb. And these guys are so, when I go back to what I was talking about, the introduction, so transparent about what they've done. I've spoken to, I did speak to a reference, Shawn, they gave me, and yes, I know it's given by them, but I was very impressed with this guy, a former senior executive at a major Wall Street firm, president of one of the firms, not the top brand, but of the, one of their major business units, I'll put it that way. And I spoke to someone else there, and I have been extraordinarily impressed. It's a superb investment. So you can just get ideas just from simple emails out of the blue. Now you need to vet them. So I can also tell you I've gotten the other extreme as well. So, but you never know where you can get them from. But again, wherever it is, you have to go through the vetting process in a rigorous fashion.
Well, I guess to extend on that, once you've identified the manager and you're starting the vetting process, I think one of the things that came up in our call when we were planning for this panel was just the focus on the personnel. And a comment I heard on a due diligence webinar yesterday was an allocation to a fund is an act of trust. And I think you guys have both kind of touched on that already. But I'm wondering, if you could share more on how you evaluate a firm's or fund's personnel and how that's changed from sort of pre-COVID to post-COVID, when it's obviously a little bit more challenging to sit across the table from someone, share a meal, see the informal interaction in the office. But, Lauren, since I've got you up on my screen, if you could share some more again about, how you really dig into evaluating the personnel.
Great. So let's say pre-COVID, there was a lot of personal meeting and going to offices. And now there's much less of that. So on the negative side, yes, you're not doing that. On the positive side, it could be that there's a greater clarity. That is to say, you're not caught up in how they look or the charm or the relationship or anything. It's like Warren Buffett sitting in Omaha, Nebraska, right? Your mind, maybe in a way, your mind is more clear. It may be. I'm thinking this through myself, just in response to your question. Maybe your mind is more clear. Maybe you can look at the documents and the specifics of who these people are, what the fund is all about, etc. So, maybe there's just an opportunity there. But I think really, because you're missing some of the personal interaction, you're just going to have to dig more on the analytical side of things. Fund strategy, understanding fund strategy. I mean, that's a great one, and really digging in and understanding it, because you're presented fund strategies often you never even heard of, right? So you need to spend the time to get up to speed on this fund strategy. I can tell you from experience, investing in things that you don't understand usually does not work out well, unless maybe, again, back to the venture capital example, you're never going to understand all of these companies. You really need, in certain examples, to really go with the team and the guys and the performance and the risk management and everything else. But generally speaking, you really need to understand what these guys are doing, such that you can almost pitch it yourself. You got to do the work. You just have to do the work on the strategy. And my new thing for myself is you have to do work on the guys, the men and women who are running the fund. You really need to. However you do it, whether it's references, whether it's Shawn, I love this idea of who do you admire, digging into their headspace, what they're all about, looking at all the due diligence documents. This fund that I referred, that I recently invested in, had an incredible data room of all the investment write-ups of every single investment they had made. It was interesting. And you saw who their lawyers were, you saw who their, the administrator or the accountant or whoever, down to what percentage of the GP each partner owned. I thought it was extraordinarily transparent, and that gave me reassurance as to who these people are. So I think you really, on the other hand, concerning COVID, yes, some of the soft issues of relationship management will be harder to get at, but it's an opportunity to refine your thinking and to be more diligent and incisive about making decisions.
All right.
Hey, Robert, can I just jump in here 1 second?
Yeah.
I want to make a comment on both Lauren's and Shawn's comment, which is that so I think hedge funds are still doing this year. There's some hedge funds that have separated themselves from the field with factors of performance far greater than anybody else. So some hedge funds are doing 20%, others are doing 300% this year, right? And then in the private equity space, there's a lot of growth in this kind of very, like Lawrence is kind of talking about in the venture capital space, but in private equity, there's this very focused perspective now in private, narrowing your private equity approach. But one of the things I want to talk about is that there's a lot of different areas for getting funding if you're a hedge fund. Obviously there's seeders, there's anchors, there's blah, 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 right? Family offices, institutions, emerging manager, allocators, etc. But I had a conversation with a seeder a while back, and actually there's a newsletter out of Greenwich, Connecticut, and all they do is interview. They have dinner parties, they have dinners with hedge funds and other managers, and they said that their keys, they wanted to sit across from the guy and start asking questions like what will make them happy? At what point will they kind of become satiated? Because if they're in it to like buy a boat, or a yacht, then they know that that's kind of like their limit. And, so they actually have tells, and as a seeder, they want to have a fund that's going to go to $1 billion. So they don't want to have a manager who's going to be very satisfied at 100 million. They want to get that large fund that just takes off, right? So when you guys are looking at funds, do you look at the manager and again, headspace and their personal goals? I know it's great to get due diligence and look at their data room and see all the work they've ever done. There's some really great, spectacular guys out there. But when you see what their goals are, I think that might put you in a different place. Any thoughts on that, folks?
Marty, can you just drill down? What do you mean by goals?
So this newsletter in Greenwich kind of has had fantastic predictive powers, and I got to pull them back up with the name. But they're like the Hedge Fund Emerging Manager newsletter, right? Their goals in terms of size and performance, because what they want to do is see focus and the ability, whether the space that they're investing in has actually growth capacity, right? And whether that manager has the bandwidth to know when his current strategy is going to reach a limit, whether they can segue into another strategy, and whether they thought of it in great detail, how much they know about that strategy, et cetera, rather than just like a manager who's reached their limit and now it's just kind of spitballing in terms of what's a good strategy to get into, right? So again, it's just how solid is that manager? Where will they feel will they keep on going until there is, is their desire very high to perform at any stage, or are they happy or content to get to one stage and then kind of level off?
Absolutely. Look, in a way, I'm looking at the decision as to which manager to choose as if I'm looking at, it's a business analysis, right? If it's a soft drink business, where are they in the marketplace? What is their strategic advantage and what's their strategic plan, right? And I'm looking at a manager the same way. What is their niche? What is their area of expertise? And what is their opportunity to exploit that area of expertise in the market opportunity? So I'm trying to look at it the same way, and I want to know that they have an edge in the marketplace. They're not just one of untold number of managers doing this, and then there's less opportunity for growth or performance, or if there are, that they truly have a competitive edge. And yes, that does speak to their capacity, that does speak to their growth, that speaks to their investment team, all of those things. I'll just tell you something else about the way I do my analysis is oftentimes I'll just have conversations again and again. I'll layer them with different people in the fund. I let them sink in over time. So I'm not just trying to do this all at once. I just need to sort of feel comfortable at the end of the process. But again, back to what you're saying, I think you need to have a clear vision for the fund on a macro level, not just it's an investment here or investment there.
Yes.
And maybe the team and the personnel, etc.
Marty,
Yeah.
just to add to that, and there was a lot I think to unpack. I think one of the more interesting interviews I've ever seen with an allocator was someone in Europe, family office, used to invite managers to stay with him for a weekend at his house.
Oh gosh.
And as part of that process, he would play backgammon. And she wanted to understand how that player would react to different scenarios in the game. He'd watch how the person learned how to play the game if they weren't familiar with the game. Now, this is something that isn't practical for most of us, and I'm not sure most managers would agree to this, but I think it provides an example, again, of how you want to get into the headspace of the manager. And I think one of the things that's often overlooked is getting down to the next level of people. Who are the people at the firm who are actually doing the work? Because in some instances, it's the head PM that is pulling the triggers, and it's position sizing and risk management that is the secret sauce of that fund. In other instances, it's about idea sourcing, or it's about the actual diligence of ideas, because access to the ideas has become so democratized. So I think understanding not only the motivations of the founder, the principal, but also the people who do the critical tasks at that fund, how do they view this? Was this a resume building opportunity for them? Are they going to leave in a year? what are the incentives that the founder or the principal of the firm has created for the people that are really adding value. Getting to that level, I think, can give you real vision into the likely stability of the business.
So my follow-up question is the scenario, are there ever events that trigger you to think that, yes, this is now a sector that is worth pursuing versus, 6 months ago, let's say, like COVID might say, it might turn all of your thoughts to, yes, we have to do something else. I'm going to give a great example, right? I personally think that the SpaceX launch of people to the space station is a huge win in space. I think space before that is like Blue Dogs and space.com, right? But once you got people going live to the space station being delivered by commercial enterprise, it really changes the whole thing of space, plus what SpaceX has done with commercial satellites, right? So in that moment, I became a big believer in space venture capital, whereas the moment before I didn't believe in space venture capital, right? It's a big sector, right? There's people who have mapped it all out. There's like a Wharton guy in Switzerland who's doing a lot of stuff in this space right now, right? So do you guys ever have that moment where you're like, something happens, like, yes, I have to start looking at this? Lawrence, do you ever have a moment when like an event happens that, this might now be the time for me to take a look at something that I've thought about in the past, never really gave it serious consideration. Let's look at it now.
Marty, you read my mind. You must be looking at my notes because by the way, Marty, I have to give you a hard time. You called Robert a great guy, but you did not call me a great guy or Shawn at the beginning of the meeting. So I let it go, but I must say something. I know Shawn is a great guy, and everyone knows that. I need you to acknowledge that we're both great guys.
I enjoy both your company.
Okay, I'll take it.
Lawrence, by the way, you are a great guy. You've done great things for me in Los Angeles. I very much appreciate it. So thank you.
Okay, all right. That's a compliment too. I appreciate it. All right. So Marty, this venture capital fund, we invested in a, I don't want to get into it right now. I don't feel comfortable going into this all right now in front of everybody, but we invested in a space company, and this was a moment just a few months ago where I've now become personally a believer in the space sector, and I think it's very exciting. So there are those moments. I had that exact same moment as you did, and I mean, we've all had, after COVID, there was a moment where we've all realized the acceleration of all of these trends, these digital trends, et cetera, have been, years. We're now years more in the future than we would have been otherwise. But I think drilling down on specific sectors, I had that moment, and I think there are a lot of these moments now coming forth as a consequence of recent developments. You need to be careful what the moment is. You need to make sure it's an enduring trend, of course, and it's not just a temporary one. And therein lies the rub, and you have to do the due diligence and the work. But I think, to your point, absolutely, there are those moments, and there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them right now. And back to who you're choosing on the manager front, if they're going to have such a moment, they better have a detailed analysis of this, and not just, a fly-by-night idea of, we're going to invest in this or we're going to invest in that because everyone's doing it. And hopefully they would have done it in the past too, or there's some linear connection between their interests and how that evolved to, their new interests.
And I think to echo Lawrence's point, I think you already have to be exploring that opportunity set when this opportunity arrives. It's very difficult to be nimble enough to suddenly come in and think you can understand something new, even if it does appear transformative. I do think the same idea applies to managers, however. So there are lots of managers that we've looked at that it's either the realignment of responsibilities within the firm. That's a catalyst for us moving forward. It's a change at that organization. It's a new product launch that maybe focuses on a specific area where they have demonstrated great skill, as opposed to trying to be too many things to too many people. Sometimes it's hiring the right resources, an additional person. That's a catalyst for us. And I think finally, oftentimes we'll wait for the manager to face adversity and to have a drawdown to see how they bounce back from that, or she bounces back from that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, how do they communicate with you during that period? So we look for those events sometimes as catalysts for us to get into managers who we're sort of monitoring.
And I've got, I guess, Shawn, back to you. I didn't want to let your comment slip about the cleanliness of an office. So I'd love to hear you expand on that and how that works into your process. And can you tell the cleanliness of an office now, via Zoom or a FaceTime call? And then somewhat along those lines, also, when you mentioned, getting to like layers of staff, how are you doing that now? I mean, it seems like, pre-COVID, you could walk through the office, chat up the junior analyst and see if his desk is dirty. So how do you do those things in this environment?
Sure, it's a good question. I think the second one is actually easier. Before, if you were traveling to Austin to meet with a manager from New York, and you were there and had 2 hours of time, you wanted to spend all 2 hours with the head decision maker. Now, because you're doing it via Zoom, it's very easy to arrange a convenient time to speak with someone else on the team. It doesn't have to be crammed into your one-day trip to Austin that's followed by your trip to Houston, where you had to meet 4 people while you were in Austin. So I think in some ways it's widened the window of communication. And I think the fact that managers have become more comfortable with engaging with allocators over Zoom, it's actually opened up their broader team in a way that perhaps wasn't available to you before. In regards to the cleanliness of the office, and one of the things that I've done in the past, I think Lawrence was commenting on this beautiful data room that the VC fund had. It's easy to dress yourself up. It's easy to hold yourself out there as a value investor. But when you show up in someone's office, there's $40,000 fish tanks at a $50 million hedge fund. There appears to be some misalignment in terms of the DNA of the person running the fund and how they've elected to run their own business.
Hi, Connor. Did you shower last 2 days?
Yeah.
You did? Okay, looks a little.
And Eric, I think we can hear you on your end.
No, I just muted him.
Okay. So I think, look, we have lots and lots of options as far as what we can invest in. And when you go into an office, you get the chance to find reasons not to invest with someone. And I like sometimes New York, this is really easy to do, is call someone on an hour or two's notice and say, look, I'd love to just pop by the office. They haven't had a chance to clean up the office, to do all these things. You get to see them in a more native sense. Today on Zoom, you can call someone and say, I'd love a virtual tour of the office. And what's challenging is, in many instances, people aren't at the office, which I think raises the obvious question about due diligence in today's world. What are the implications of the team no longer being together and working face to face? What are the implications of that on the results of the investment process? And that's, time will tell the answer to that, but it's something I think we're all thinking.
Well, on the topic of the team not all being in the office, another issue that came up on this operational due diligence webinar I participated in yesterday is there was a question to the panelists on whether or not they thought it was riskier to have a spread out remote team or to have everybody in one location. And I think most of the panelists talked about, from kind of a business continuity risk management standpoint, they preferred the remote workers. So I don't know if either of you guys have any comments on that, if you prefer one versus the other when you're evaluating a firm, or if it's maybe too soon in this everyone's remote situation to really know yet.
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure what I think about that. I instinctively like the idea of everyone being in the same place in the same office. I think it speaks to the professionalism and the collaboration, etc. And yet, I'm not the situation is what it is right now, and I don't think it's not necessarily a negative if they're not in the office. I haven't thought it through. I think I think if they're not in the office, it has to be a business that can thrive. And I think I'll say this much. I think it's a worthwhile question to ask. Okay, where are you guys? If you're not in the office, how are you guys working together? And how do we know this is going to be successful? So I definitely think that is a worthwhile question. I think if there's a legitimate answer to it, that's acceptable. And if there's not, well, regardless of COVID or what else is going on, it is what it is. You can't invest with them.
I can't think of many examples of where I think working remotely would be of benefit to the firm. If you're saying, listen, you don't have a physical space, so you don't have to you'd have to be less concerned about physical security from an operational standpoint than you otherwise did, perhaps I could buy that. The health of the employees is obviously an important consideration, and perhaps they're being safer at home than they are in the office. I think that's reasonable. But beyond that, I think to your point, Lawrence, it all depends on how the investment process manifests itself. If you have, and I've worked at global macro firms before, where having an investment policy committee meeting and having a debate amongst people is an important part of that process. Replicating that dialogue online, particularly given the demeanor of different people on your team, can be challenging. Someone who perhaps isn't the most vocal is easily left out of that process. And if that person is an important contributor or voice of reason in a process, then you lose that. If you had someone who played the role of talking down the portfolio manager as far as risk taking goes, not having that person in the room next to her when she's about to make that decision can be a big loss. So I think, again, like everything else, it's understanding how the sausage is made at that particular shop and understanding what potential slippage there is or additional risk as a result of not being face to face.
And then I guess sort of going on to a new topic, if assuming you're comfortable with the team and you like the strategy, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on investment structure. Either, preferred structure, fund, separate account, fund to one. And if you've done any, creative structuring where you've, liked the manager and the strategy, didn't like the structure they were offering, and maybe worked with them to come up with a better structure for your group to work with.
Look, that's a very broad question. It's a lot. That's a lot to take in. I mean, I would just say I don't have a necessarily preferred structure. It has to make sense. It has to make sense, and it has to be sellable. In other words, the clients that I'm putting into this, it's got to make sense for them. And if it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't work. The structure can provide the manager with making a lot of money, and that can be acceptable, or it provides him making a little money and it's unacceptable. So I can't say which one works. I have to say it needs to make sense, and it also needs to be properly aligned with the type of investment that is that we're considering and the risk reward on the investment. So there just has to be alignment. The investment structure, in a way, it's like it's a picture of the investment and its risk reward and opportunity for investors. And it has to mirror. And it's like I play with this because sometimes I put SPVs together, or I'm on that side of I'm playing with it. Should we charge this? Should we charge that? What can we charge? What is not reasonable to charge? Because if it doesn't make sense to the person who's buying it, they're not going to buy it. On the other hand, you don't want it to be too cheap
Feel free to call
either,
me back whenever,
because then it doesn't look good.
Email me.
So there's just got to be alignment.
Appreciate you.
And then Shawn, any additional thoughts on structure?
I'd echo all of the points that Lawrence has made. I think this is a challenge for a lot of managers. I think very few managers go to the marketplace first and ask potential investors, how would you like this fund structured? And I think if you have a strong alpha generation capability and you package that product wrong, that's half the reason that a lot of these strategies never take off. at least from a commercial perspective. I think this is where you can lean in heavily to a good fund formation lawyer. And when you're a new fund starting out, or you're an existing fund launching a new vehicle, you have a variety of options from a cost perspective. I mean, one of the largest fund formation lawyers in the industry is based here out of Atlanta, and tends to do very sort of plain vanilla fund launches, but at very attractive prices. And that, I think, fills a need within the industry. But if you're talking about launching a vehicle for, let's say, a bunch of family offices that want to leverage their balance sheet for co-investments or one-off investment ideas, then having a sophisticated lawyer who's going to help you craft a drawdown structure that's going to work for that group is very important. And I do think there is an opportunity, particularly with smaller managers, to go to them early on in their evolution and to say to them, we appreciate the skill that you have in a certain area, but we'd like to see it packaged this way. And one of the benefits of being early, assuming you're coming with scale, is to request a managed account. And managed accounts have certainly been growing as it pertains to new manager launches. And there's a level of transparency there that obviously can't be replicated in a fund. And there's a level of control, of course, if things don't go well. So I think it is an important consideration. I think people are becoming more open to it, just as they're becoming more open to fee negotiation. And I think it's something that families should be vocal about expressing